So you want to make a task for real life Among Us, but you don't know where to start. Well, you've come to the right place. In this video, I'll go much more in depth into the structure of the code than I did in the main episode, and hopefully give you enough to get you started. So, let's go. No, none of that. This isn't a full episode, just a small tutorial. Alright, so before you start, you should have a basic understanding of both TypeScript and React. This is not a step-by-step tutorial, and if it was, I would just do it all myself. So while you can follow me step by step for how to get the task set up, the actual implementation of the task will be up to you. So it's important to have that foundational knowledge. So to get started on our custom task, we're going to come into the source directory, going to go to game and then tasks. Here we can see the basic task.ts file, and we can use this as a little bit of a template. So the task system makes heavy use of polymorphism, so most of the complicated code when it comes to interacting with the client is abstracted away from you. So to actually get started on the task itself, we're going to go make a new file within tasks, and let's call it mytask.ts. Here we're going to make a new class. And it's going to extend base task. Make sure you import it at the top here. And we'll see it's complaining a little bit because it's got non-implemented abstract members. So we'll just do a quick fix here. Let's implement those. Get class ID. This is the really important one. Every single different type of task has a unique ID, and this is what the server uses to tell the client when it's like, hey, I want you to do a task, and here is what the type of task it is. So this is really important for us to make sure is unique. So before you go ahead and choose a class ID, just scroll through the already implemented tasks, make sure someone hasn't already beaten you to it. So in our case, let's just go replace this with return my task. And the task IDs use camel case. So doTask is another big function, but it's not as required as getTaskID. DoTask is called on the server whenever a player performs the task. So for many tasks, you won't actually need this, but it's also useful if you need the server to perform some sort of logic whenever you're doing a task. In this case, let's just delete everything in it. We're not going to use it. So now we actually have to register our task with the server. So we're going to come over to the task manifest file, and under the function load task, we're going to add a new line, and this is going to be if task.classID equals, and it's going to be our class ID, so my task. And we are going to return a new, and then we're going to use our task class. So my task, make sure to import it at the top. And then for our parameters, we're going to say task.id. Now this is the individual ID of the task on the map. The difference between the task ID and the class ID is that the task ID is what's printed onto the QR code, and it represents each individual task on the map, while the class ID represents each type of task. So if you have two instances of wires in the map, for instance, both of them will have the class ID of wires, but their task ID might be cafeteria wires or electrical wires. And then we're going to go ahead and set our second parameter to task.requireConfirmationScan. Now, this is indicating whether you're going to have to scan the QR code at the end or not. And then finally is task.parameters. So I should probably talk about this a little bit. Each task can have arbitrary parameters. So if we go back into my task, one of the things that we can actually call is this.params. And this is an arbitrary object that can have any type of different parameters in it, essentially. Anything that can be defined in JSON can be here. And that's actually going to be defined on a per map basis, so it's useful for if you need each task to have a little bit of excess information that gets sent to it. So in this case, let's just do a little console.log. and it's going to be player.name performed my task with a value of, and then let's just say that we're going to put in to the parameters params dot value. There. All right. So now we're done with our task on the server, and we need to implement it on the client. So let's go ahead and close out of this, and we are going to go into our client over here. We're going to go to source, and the client is actually a whole sub-node project, which uses React, and it's what actually hosts the web app. So we're going to go to source, components, gameplay, tasks. And here we can see our basic task from before and our root class. So let's go ahead and make a new file. It's going to be mytask.tsx. And the client uses Pascal case while the server uses camel case. It's a bit confusing. I'm probably going to fix that at some point, but that's just the case right now, so let's just roll with it. So mytask.tsx this time, and I have React snippets enabled, so let's go ahead and RCE and get a base React component. But instead of extending component, we are going to extend task. So here's where we get to be creative and have a little bit of fun with the creation of our task. And I can't tell you exactly how to do this, obviously. It's going to be up to you how you want to implement your task. But I'm just going to do something really simple. It's going to be a button that says complete custom task. And then finally, to make this button actually work and complete the task, we'll go ahead and make a function called handle finish task. And this is going to be an arrow function. If you know React, you'll understand why. And this is just simply going to call this dot finish. And then we'll set our button's onClick event to be our handle task function. So now handle finish task will be called whenever our button is clicked, and that will call the this.finish method, which will actually run the code for finishing the task. It's also worth noting that we have access to our parameters in the client as well. So if I create a paragraph, and I'll just say value, and that's going to be this.props.task.params. And now this is going to be that same object that we had back here in my task. So params, and then we'll also get the dot value tag from that. So now we have to also register this with the client. And to do that, we're going to go to the taskwindow.tsx file. And within the getTask method, the one with the comment on the top, we're going to add a line. And it's going to be if class ID equals, and it's going to be our class ID again, so my task. We're going to return. We're going to do a JSX tag with my task. We're going to say game manager is equal to game manager, and this is just a reference to a class which is used behind the scenes for some of the stuff. Task is equal to task, and onFinish equals this.onFinish. We'll make it a self-closing tag, and now it's registered with the client if I make sure that is spelled properly. So finally, I have to add this to the map file. So to do that, I'm actually going to go to maps default.json. And this is something that everyone's going to do when they're setting up for a new location. So this is just a testing entry to make sure your task works. We're going to go ahead and add a new entry to our tasks array. We're going to set our ID to, let's say, test task. And this is going to be what's printed on the QR code. Our class ID is equal to what we set our class ID to, so my task. Our coordinates are not used yet, but they will be where the task renders on the screen. But for now, I'll just set it to 0, 0. Our icon is also not used yet, but it will be what icon the task uses to render on the screen. And that's going to be /assets/icon.png. But you could really set it to anything. Require confirmation scan is going to be whether we have to scan the QR code again once we're done. Let's set it to true. And our params is that famous object that we have used a lot before, and here we're actually going to set our values. So value within params, let's just set it to a string blah. Great. So now if I didn't screw up, we should be able to run npm run dev to start up the server and client, and we should see it here. So let's go ahead and log in. We're on localhost 3000 is the default port which it starts on. And let's go ahead and boot up a new tab as well. You'll notice that the URL is by default set to localhost 5000, which is what the server will be running on if you're connecting from the local computer. But if you want to connect from another device, you're going to have to replace localhost with your local IP address on your network. And if we go ahead and hit start game, we should see we've got our test task here. So let me go from the non-imposter account. They render out of order for some reason. I'm going to have to look into that. There's no real order at which they're defined. I'll hit scan task and let's go test task. And now we can see our value is rendering as blah, and complete custom task, the button is there. And then if we hit complete custom task, it asks us for our QR code. So let's go ahead and type test task again. And it's gone green, and we've got 33.33333333 rendering as our percentage. Obviously, this will look a lot better when it's a taskbar and not just failing to render the decimal because it's a third. But yeah, that's how you make a task. So I hope this little mini tutorial was useful. If you have any questions, feel free to ask on the Discord server. I will try to help out as much as I can, and I can't wait to work with you. See ya.